So, right now, there's a massive US naval fleet just sitting off the coast of Venezuela. On top of that, a no-fly zone is in effect. It feels like decades of tension are about to boil over into some kind of final showdown. So why now? What's really going on? In this explainer, we're going to break down the argument from our source material to get to the bottom of it.
To really make sense of that fleet, the source material we're looking at brings up this ancient military strategy. It argues that what we're witnessing isn't just a straightforward military operation, it's more like a strategic performance, a show.
So, is it just a show, or is there something much bigger at play here? Well, according to the source, the real answer is a pretty complex mix of history, economics, and honestly, a super high-stakes fight for the future of the entire global financial system. So let's dive in, starting with that immediate show of force.
All right, Section 1, a show of force. And the subtitle here is interesting, an empire's anxious posture.
So why anxious? Well, the source argues that there's this growing perception, right or wrong, of U.S. decline. You've got the rise of China, challenges in places like Ukraine and the Middle East, and even a lot of anxiety back home. So this massive show of force, the argument goes, is really an attempt to project strength, to remind the world, hey, we're still in charge here.
But this tension, it's not new, not by a long shot. Next up, a legacy of conflict. The source says to really get this, we have to rewind the clock, like almost 200 years, to a fundamental clash of two big ideas for the Americas. Bolivar versus the Monroe Doctrine.
Okay, so on one side you've got Simon Bolivar's vision, right? A united, sovereign Latin America, strong enough to stand on its own, without outside empires calling the shots. And on the other side, you have the U.S. Monroe Doctrine, which basically said this half of the planet belongs to us. I mean, these two ideas were just bound to clash, and Venezuela has always been right at the center of that ideological storm.
So what's the fuel for this fire? What makes this ideological conflict so explosive? Well, it really boils down to one word: oil. And not just some oil. We're talking an almost unimaginable amount of it. It's been both Venezuela's greatest blessing and its deepest, darkest curse.
I mean, just to try and wrap your head around the scale here, we are talking about over $18 trillion worth of proven oil reserves. That's the largest on Earth. Yeah, that's more than Saudi Arabia. So this isn't just a natural resource, it's a massive lever of global power. And for most of the 20th century, that lever was in the hands of a pretty small elite who were, let's say, very friendly with foreign corporate interests.
And this is where that blessing really turns into a curse. Here's how the trap was sprung. In the 70s, you had a huge oil boom, so Venezuela borrowed tons of money. But then, bam, the 80s hit. Prices collapsed, and suddenly the country was saddled with an impossible $34 billion debt. This kicked off a classic debt crisis playbook, with international lenders swooping in and demanding one thing: austerity.
And austerity isn't just some economic term. It has a real, devastating impact on everyday people. We're talking about slashing public spending, privatizing state-owned industries, and the one that really hurt was getting rid of government subsidies. Removing fuel subsidies in a country where gas was practically free and the whole economy depended on it, that was the final straw. The result was a series of deadly riots known as El Caracazo, and they just completely shattered the old political system. And it was out of that chaos that a new figure emerged, a guy who wasn't just promising a few reforms, but a total, top-to-bottom revolution: Hugo Chavez.
And Chavez represented a direct challenge to that old way of doing things. He basically nationalized the oil industry in practice, forcing the state oil company to actually use that wealth to fund social programs for the Venezuelan people, things like healthcare, education, housing. It was like he was reviving Bolivar's dream. And according to the source, when a nation sitting on the world's largest oil reserves declares that its wealth belongs to its people, and not to, say, Exxon or Chevron, that is a massive threat to the U.S.-led economic order.
And this right here brings us to the absolute core of the source's argument. It claims this fight isn't just about oil, and it's not even just about ideology. It's about something much, much bigger, something that underpins all of America's global power: the U.S. dollar itself.
Okay, so for the better part of a century, the petrodollar system has been the bedrock of the global economy. Here's the deal. Oil is priced and traded in U.S. dollars. That means every country on Earth needs a big pile of dollars to buy oil, which makes the dollar the world's #1 reserve currency. This gives the U.S. an incredible amount of financial power. But that system is now facing its biggest challenge ever.
And this is where the BRICS nations come into play. We're talking Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This bloc of countries is actively building an alternative financial system. And its main purpose? to trade for essential stuff, especially oil, without having to use the US dollar at all.
And how they're doing it is actually pretty simple, but its effects could be profound. China is already starting to sign major oil deals in its own currency, the yuan, with big players like Saudi Arabia and Russia. And every single time a deal like that happens, it chips away, little by little, at the global demand for the dollar. And that weakens the very foundation of America's financial power.
And that, the source argues, is why controlling Venezuelan oil has become such an urgent strategic priority for the U.S. The idea is to prevent those massive reserves, the largest on the planet, remember, from being sold in yuan or rubles or any other currency. It's all about defending the dollar.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together for a second. You've got the deep historical conflict, you've got this insane amount of oil wealth, and now you have this existential threat to the dollar. All of that's the backdrop for the final showdown that's happening right now.
So who is central to the U.S. strategy in all this? Well, the source points to one person, the U.S.-backed opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. And as you're about to see, her vision for Venezuela is the polar opposite of the Bolivarian Revolution.
I mean, in her own words, she's promising to open Venezuela for foreign investment with a massive privatization program. That means opening up the country's oil, gas, and mining sectors to foreign companies. It's a 180-degree turn from the policies of the Chavez era.
And what about using military force? Well, when she was asked about potential U.S. strikes, she said that an increase in pressure is the only way to make the current government step down. The source we're analyzing presents these direct quotes as pretty clear evidence of what's really at stake here.
And that pressure she's talking about, it is now at an all-time high. We're talking decades of intensifying sanctions, and now the deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most powerful aircraft carriers in the world, plus that no-fly zone. According to the source, the stage is being set for potential strikes.
So, in the end, this whole fight for Venezuela isn't just about Venezuela. The source frames it as a battle for the future of the entire global economic order. Because whoever controls that oil holds incredible leverage over energy prices, over the future of the world's reserve currency, and over the ambitions of rising powers like China.
And that really leaves us with one big final question. As the global order that's been in place for decades continues to shift, as a new, more multipolar world emerges, who will control the future of energy? The answer to that question might just decide who holds the real power for the next 100 years.